Good afternoon. I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of BLACK ENTERPRISE, the nation's #1 Black media brand with more than 9 million monthly unique visitors. And I'm excited to welcome you to the 2021 BMXCEL Summit, celebrating the best of who we are. Allow me to begin by thanking our title sponsor, FedEx. BMXCEL is absolutely dedicated to celebrating and elevating our legacy of excellence, regardless of the obstacles we face. We at BLACK ENTERPRISE appreciate FedEx, the host sponsor of this event since its inception in 2017, and all our corporate partners who have helped us create an unparalleled virtual experience in service to this mission. The motto of BMX is celebrating the best of who we are. This year's conference, our second virtual execution of this event, is not just a celebration, but a rejection of any narrative that denies the truth of Black men's collective achievement, resolve, and resilience. This is especially important now as we continue to navigate one of the most challenging periods of our history for our communities and our nation. We are focused more than ever on accountability for ourselves and for the people and institutions that impact our lives. Specifically, this year's BMXCEL Summit and BLACK ENTERPRISE as a company is devoting increased attention to whether the corporations that made pledges to invest in challenging systemic bias in the wake of George Floyd's murder are actually delivering on those commitments. This is just one of the many ways that we, as Black men, stand up for ourselves and each other. That's what BMX is all about. Over the next 2 days, we will engage with an extraordinary group of Black men from the worlds of corporate America, entrepreneurship, media, finance, and entertainment. We will have critical conversations about leadership and define success in the still emerging new normal. We will explore how to take advantage of new business opportunities, strive for C-suite leadership roles, and build wealth. Lastly, we will talk about what it means to excel in a post-COVID world and how we can heal and strengthen ourselves along the way. 2020 proved beyond all doubt that harm will find us, whether or not we have chosen the risk. In 2021, we're proving that we are more than equal to the challenge. No matter what, we must advance, and we will advance because Black men excel. It's what we do. Now, he describes himself as the trial lawyer for justice. He has also been dubbed Black America's Attorney General. In any case, Ben Crump is now firmly established as the most prominent legal champion for Black Americans since Johnnie Cochran and Thurgood Marshall, and a sterling example of the leadership and excellence we celebrate each year at BMXCEL. Ben Crump is heavily involved in his community, having previously endowed scholarships to Florida A&M University, Livingston College, Florida State University, and Bethune-Cookman University for minority law students. He also serves as the president and co-founder of My Dad 360, a mentoring program for fathers endorsed by the late Colin Powell and recognized by President Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative. Crump has been known for his legal work tied to police brutality and racial justice, including his record $27 million settlement for the murder of George Floyd from the City of Minneapolis. Today, among other cases, he is battling in court for justice for Ahmaud Arbery, the unarmed Black man hunted, shot, and killed by 2 white men in Georgia last year. This Lumberton, North Carolina native received his undergraduate and law degrees from Florida State University. Throughout his legal career, he has demonstrated his commitment to the idea that the Constitution applies to everyone at every level of society. Crump has since expanded the focus of his practice to fight for economic justice, with a special emphasis on corporate America, among other significant legal crusades. I could go on, but I would rather you get an opportunity to hear from the esteemed attorney himself. Please welcome my dear friend, Ben Crump, in his exclusive Black Men Excel Fireside Chat. Hey, Ben, thank you for joining me for the Black Men Excel Summit. As I said in my intro, you're the walking epitome of what it is to be a Black man who's excelled. And I would submit again that I don't know of any person, male or female, that's done more for African-American people in regards to justice, and Black African-American men in particular, than you. And so we are honored to have you join us for this fireside chat today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Butch, for continuing the legacy of your father and the Black enterprise pedigree. We truly stand on your shoulders. I am starting to evolve, and you know, we have these personal conversations from just talking about criminal justice and civil justice, but also talking about economic justice. And so for Black enterprise leadership on that issue, I can never say thank you enough, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your kind words. Would love to get, before we jump into, because I really want to focus this conversation more on your work in the area of economic justice, but I would be remiss if I didn't get an update from you on what's happening in social justice, an update on the respective cases, the ones that you can comment on, how that's going. And, you know, as I was discussing with one of our senior people earlier today, every time we think that we're sort of kind of getting out of the woods, right, and that it's gotten better, and we're recovering from Breonna Taylor, we're recovering from George Floyd, another thing comes up. But would love to get an update from you on, you know, where do we stand now on those things you've been working on, and perhaps there's never going to be a time that I mean, I guess it's good for your business, but it's not so great for Black folks, but it's terrible.
You know, as I told Ted Koppel, I pray every day, Butch Graves, that my police brutality division of my law firm could be closed down. That means they wouldn't keep killing our children, our young people. And so it's unbelievable that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has stalled in the United States Senate. And so I find myself talking a lot to White House counsel and Susan Rice, the director of domestic policy, and Cedric Richmond, the director of public engagement for President Biden and Vice President Harris. And at this point, since the Senate has failed to act, and it's hard to believe, Butch, that after George Floyd was tortured to death, and everybody was saying, finally, we're going to have some meaningful substantive change in police reform, something that has eluded us for over 58 years since President LBJ and the Great Society passed the police reform back then. We have never had police reform in America that was substantive. And so when you think about all the Black people who've been shot in the back and killed unjustly, Michael Brown and Ferguson, hands up, don't shoot. Everybody said we were going to get reformed then, and now here we are almost 9 years later in the aftermath of George Floyd, and still we're not going to get the police reform that many feel will prevent some of these senseless deaths. However, President Biden has committed that he's going to enter a sweeping executive order, which is something that's within his authority and power, but it will only last as long as he's president. After that, executive orders leave when the president leaves.
But listen, you keep fighting the fight there, and you're going to gain the support. And, you know, I'd like to think that as time goes on, well-meaning people of all races will begin to say, you know what, we've got to do the right thing. We've got to get justice, has got to be justice for all, not just us for some. And we'll be, people like yourself are holding this country accountable. But that, in some ways, is exactly how I'd like to pivot, if I can, to the next frontier, right? Because racial justice, trial justice, those are elements, things, the right to vote, all the things that we are continuously fighting on. But there's one justice that sits atop of those, and it's the sort of the last frontier of it. And quite honestly, economic justice is what I'm referring to. Mm-hmm. Economic justice, in some ways, actually can help to reduce some of the other things that we as Black folks have been subject to, because many of the divides, and you and I have had this conversation, but I said many of the divides that we have in this country, digital divide, health divide, education divide, justice divide, are all a derivative of something we call the wealth divide. Right? Yes. And if you can solve to creating economic parity, wealth, and opportunity, if you have wealth, and when I say wealth, I'm not talking about your person got to be a billionaire, but I mean wealth that you can take care of your family and earn a living and own a home and send your kids to school and, the more basic rights of things. If you have that, then these other divides are just derivatives and they begin to fade away. So what's happened is that we've seen people saying, okay, we need to get this, we're going to get all these other sort of rights, but without the right to being able to have economic parity, then you're still kind of in this second-class citizens group. And that's the area that I think we've got to solve for, and where private enterprise plays a role. And when I say private enterprise, I'm talking about corporate America, which are publicly owned companies, but that individuals can own shares in and all the above. But we're still seeing in corporate America a challenge in providing economic opportunity and economic justice for African Americans. You've now begun to be pulled into, which is great, that by those folks who people would feel, what possibly could they have is wrong? They got a good job and they're working with whatever firm, but they're not getting what they're supposed to be getting. Talk a little bit about how you've been now brought into beginning to look at and examine corporate America and in its right for economic justice for African Americans.
Certainly, Butch. And, I know I'm talking to the Black Men Summit, and it is really fortunate to have a Black man who's so astute in business as yourself, who, I can turn to for counsel. Most times people come to the lawyers for counsel, but we don't know it all. It is good for us to engage and to continue to learn about different aspects. And so when we have those morning calls, we talk in the airports, but I'm really picking your brain too now, Butch, because I'm trying to be able to make the case in these corporate executive suites, like we make the case in courts of law and courts of public opinion, because they are a whole different court unto themselves, really, because they are corporate executives. Their first obligation, based on the corporate citizen as it was envisioned by Alexander Hamilton and the founders, is to their corporate citizen is to be profitable. So that's their first line of thought. And then, they may have some aspirational thoughts, but they are just trying to make profit. And so part of what I've always believed we have to convince them of is that you can be profitable, even more profitable, being equitable with Black people and brown people and everybody. But, unless they see, I believe in Butch, you can correct me, unless they see how doing business with browning of America, a greater browning of America, then they won't do it. They're going to act in their economic best interest. And so if you understand that algebraic expression, then we got to come up with the variables. And I go back to what John Johnson said, the best civil rights bill I've ever seen in my life is the dollar bill. And because once Black minority suppliers can work with these Amazons and these Targets and these Walmarts and so forth, then they get to satisfy their obligation, their commitment to social justice that they all made in the aftermath of George Floyd video. And then they also get to be profitable. It's a win-win for everybody. And so it's people like Black Enterprise who have to say, no, you can satisfy your commitment by working with this minority supplier, by doing this with Black Enterprise incubator system, things to say, we're gonna help you all with your commitment. And so it's been fascinating, I guess, because I've been so outspoken on this whole notion of two Americas that these corporate executives have now been trying to engage me to say, hey, Ben, we've seen the light. Help us from your opinion, do right by George Floyd and the supporters of George Floyd and all these marginalized people. So I am constantly now going being Ben Crump, because that's all I know how to do, but and I would tell them, you all have engaged in racism, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but I want to just let you know, I want to be clear that you've engaged in racism, but I'm not going to call you a racist because now I put you on notice. And now that you're on notice, the law says notice is 2/3 of the law. Once you're on notice, then you have an obligation to do something about it. So you need to call my friend Butch Graves and Black Enterprise and let them help cure you of this sickness of racism.
Yeah, you said something to me a long time ago, which I use as a quote. You said, "There's nothing that a racist hates worse than being called a racist." It stuck with me. I said, because everyone wants to, those, they start talking about those people as if they're not a part of that because it's someone else and they don't consider themselves to be there. But the thing that must happen, that legally must happen, and the help of you, Ben, and others, we've got to hold corporate America accountable to their pledge, right? Don't tell us how terrible you feel after George Floyd. Don't tell us you've committed $500 million to fight racial and social injustice, and you want to help this, you want to do this, what happens? Because at the end of the day, as I've said to you before, many times these programs that people want to come up with are these
financial literacy,
these pejorative programs that are very, very demeaning on some ways, in some levels. And so they'll come on and say, listen, we want to create for Black people a financial literacy for Black America. And as you've heard me say to you repeatedly, do not let people tell you that they want to, quote, literate you. I don't need to be literated. I don't need financial literacy. I need financial empowerment. So what we want them to do is invest in our companies, invest in our people. Don't teach us to, I don't need another playground built. I don't need you to tell me how to write a check. What I need you to do is to make an investment, corporate America, in our businesses. And I need you to hire people in positions of power that look like me. And one of the things that I would ask you to do and look at is to say, when these corporations come to you and they say, we really believe in everything you're saying and what have you, say, okay, well, let me get out your 10K report. And I want to see the 5 most highly compensated people at your company. because that's a legal obligation they have to be able to reveal who are those people. They're called named officers. Okay. So the 5 most highly compensated officers in every public company, their named officers have to be listed, and what is their compensation? Inevitably, there's almost nobody Black within those top 5. And you have to ask them, how many Black people report directly to you as the CEO? And I don't want to know about the diversity and inclusion person, right? Because that is not a lift. So don't tell me that you have diversity and inclusion reporting to you and that person happens to be Black, and so therefore I have a Black officer. That's nice, but that's not what we want to know. I want to know about the line businesses, because at the end of the day, one of the things that is true is that those corporations that have embraced and included Black and brown people as a part of what they're trying to do, embrace them by hiring them, going after the market, what have you, have performed much better when they're measured year over year, much better than those that have not. So this is not even like it's a nice thing to do. Their fiduciary responsibilities as officers of that company are to make sure that they're profitable. And that the way to make sure you're profitable is to make sure you're inclusive of everyone.
Now, that's profound, Butch, and I will remember those 2 questions, 10K report, as well as who reports directly to you, Mr. CEO, since you are you don't want to be called a racist. Because let's keep it real. We're talking to Black people here. They don't mind the racist acts, but they don't want to be identified as a racist. And when you start putting that pressure on them in that regard, it's amazing the things they do to not be identified as a racist. I mean, it'll boggle your mind. And it makes me think of just a couple of things, because the other thing with economic justice, just like with civil justice in the 7th Amendment, we have a constitutional right to bring a lawsuit against these corporations. And so we start to get all this discovery, and we start to see all these things on these companies that they certainly don't want to be made public. And, you know, from my mentor and personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, the one thing I absolutely believe is you got to fight in the court of law, but you got to first fight in the court of public opinion. So when you take these corporations to task based on how they are treating their Black employees, we ain't even talking about the customers yet, how they treating the people who's supposed to be part of their family, then it becomes an issue.
I'd like to get your take on, you've probably been contacted on this, and this has to do with minimum wage and what is, minimum wage in this country and the rights for people who are working. Because now I'm talking about, you're actually looking at and representing people who are working. We're not even talking about people who are not, but people who are working, and the right to a fair wage and the right to make a living. Because all we see is skyrocketing cost of education, skyrocketing cost of housing, and a pushback on something that would seem such a basic right, like $15 an hour to be paid as a minimum wage. What's your take on this, and how do you see this unfolding in terms of that part of what you're seeing in America right now?
Yeah, and it goes back, I believe, to just fundamental good business. I believe if you have a employer who is secure in the wage they receive from your company, that is a living wage, one that I can keep a roof over my family's head, I could put food on the table, I can try to strive to give them education that, we can afford. We're not talking about an Ivy League education, but something that they can attend a state-supported college or HBCU, those things. And so what we're doing, but I'm a lawyer, so I don't like to get into the habit of asking people to do right. We just sue them. You know, it like we there's some corporations now. There's issues of whether they should unionize or not because they're not treating people right and so forth. And you know, companies they don't do stuff because they want to just be fair and right. That ain't how they got to be these titans of industry. They got that for squeezing every penny. And sometimes the regular people, the little guys, especially people in our community, the only hope they have is having somebody who has a voice or having influence and resources to use that influence and resources to give them a voice so they won't continue to be marginalized and disenfranchised and victimized. So we look at these things and we start suing the companies, and I'm starting to do a lot more of it now as I evolved to being a lawyer who fights for economic justice. We when you don't pay overtime to people, when you deny them healthcare benefits that are prescribed by federal law, and these type of things, stuff that most of our people don't know what to do, and none of our lawyers are doing this type of law because it's a challenging law. It's a big risk, but it's a big reward if you can win it. And so it's about having the resources. What you said, something so important, Butch, about being able to scale. When I took the Ben Crump law firm national, I worked with a lot of people who were smart businessmen, not just smart lawyers. They understood the business of law. And we were able to scale it to the point where we had, 200 lawyers ready to go fight with any corporation to do the right thing. And obviously I got to use my bully pulpit, with the blessings that God said, well, when Ben Crump show up, here goes CNN and MSNBC. And so it's not going to be the traditional fight in the court of law. It's going to be a fight in the court of public opinion. And everybody who is a municipal elected official who decides on what what company we're going to put our pension fund money into, well, they watching NBC Today Show and Good Morning America, and we're talking about these pharmaceutical companies and what they did to Henrietta Lacks. We're talking about these corporations that are doing this environmental pollution in marginalized communities. And like I said, like we talk about so often, but we're talking about racist actions or discriminatory actions, and we're telling people elected in Atlanta, Georgia, people elected in New Orleans, where you got Black elected officials, hey, you should demand greater accountability for these companies since you're parking, $2 billion in their company on your pension fund. And so that's the intellectual education that I'm learning from doing this litigation. And we have to continue to try to educate others on it because, as the proverb says, education does no good if we keep it amongst the educated. And I believe if people know how to fight this battle strategically, that we will win this war no matter how much they try to deny us. And the other thing I would say, like John Johnson said, there's no denying excellence. There's no denying excellence. One last thing I'll say quickly, Butch, now I'm just trying to give you as much as I can. I'm starting to do a lot with recording artists, some of these R&B legends, and fighting to get their intellectual property rights back from the record companies who have, really done great injustices to them over their careers. You're young, you don't make the best decisions, you're on drugs. I mean, these are icons who made some of the best music ever. My fraternity brother, good friend and client, George Clinton, was the first person I was able to help. And he got all his intellectual property rights back. And he's 80 years old. And as he said, Butch, he's now making more money in a year than he made his entire career. Now that Atomic Dog and One Nation of the Groove, everybody who used that music, now when they scream it, when they put it on Disney, they have to pay George, not some record company, not some manager who took advantage of him. Anita Baker, I'm working with her, she got her masters back, and now she's trying to get all her publishing and her royalties, all these things that have been denied from them for decades, and it represents generational wealth. If they can pass it on to their children now, their intellectual property rights to things they created, not what Mr. Sony created, not what Mr. Warner Brother created, but what these Black people with their genius created, finally can realize the benefit of their intellectual genius.
Well, at the end of the day, they're entrepreneurs in their own right, but they were taken advantage of, no different than someone who might have created something and sold it to a company and didn't know any better. And the next thing you know, that person said, listen, I'm going to give you, a lump sum, which seems like a lot of money. And, I know some artists who are in my generation who did the same thing. They're not young anymore, but they were young at the time. And they got paid well in what seemingly was well, but they didn't create wealth. And so what you're doing is you're monetizing for them what unfortunately was not monetized from them in the past. And I hope that there will be other artists who will learn from what you did, because, Prince famously was the one who came back out and said, this is crazy, right? I'm a slave to a record company.
Yeah.
I'm not an artist representing myself. And so I think that young people, the next generation is beginning to be awakened by what they see. But I hope that you will continue to help these artists, because listen, but not for, as I said to others that were talking about what are the contributions, I said, what is our whole in American society is the whole spirit of it, and what we do is been in a large part based off of the contributions of what African Americans have provided to American society. Music, the arts, you name it, sports, entertainment, that has come through the genius, as you call it, of African Americans. But that same genius exists in African Americans in business. They just has to be unlocked, and they had to be given the opportunity, economic opportunity, the financial wherewithal to be able to compete and to be able to see themselves in that. Let me get to I want to wrap this up, because this was such a great conversation, Ben, and in many ways, you're such an inspiration to the young men in particular watching this, right? This conference is called the BMXCEL Summit, with an emphasis on the word excel, because excellence is what is sewn into the fabric of who we are. We have to believe it. And I would ask you just to share in your travels, when you see young Black men in particular, what words of inspiration would you give them to be, because it doesn't really matter. I mean, your story is a unique story. You could take a minute to talk about it, but it's not like you were born into wealth, Ben. It's not like you were born into someone that said, handed you a silver spoon or a gold spoon and said, Ben, here it is. You got it, right? But someone along the way took enough time to say, hey, Ben, you can be that. I remember distinctly, I tell my friends this all the time. So the one thing that my mother did, she kept telling me, kept banging into my head over and over again, you're smarter than them. You're better than them. You're smarter than them. You're better than them. Not because she necessarily even believed it, because she wanted me to believe it, that I could compete and I could perform at the same level as my white counterparts. I just needed the opportunity. So what is it you would share with our young Black men who are watching this today to give them that hope and inspiration? Because much of what they see is so much despair around them. What is it you would do?
And that's a great lesson your mother gave you, because I do think so much of it is what Charles Dickens said, great expectations. If you have great expectations of a person, normally they would live up to them. If you have dismal expectations, then people will probably, uh, uh, you know, achieve low expectations because nobody believed in them. Nobody told them they were better than American society said about Black people, especially Black men. And I think about with my own story, it's well chronicled. My mother was, a single mother raising three Black boys and worked two jobs, hotel, laundry, cleaning in the morning, and then went to the Converse shoe factory there in my hometown of Lumberton, North Carolina, and worked the second shift. And she taught me, like your mother indoctrinated in your mind, a parable for you to live by. My mother indoctrinated into me over and over again. She would say, baby, life is not fair. Life is hard. You make it fair by what you bring to the table. And if you don't bring that into the table, don't expect anybody to let you sit down at the table. And she always encouraged us, education was something to bring to the table because she believed once you got it up here, nobody could ever take it away from you. And so, before I go on, I just always like to acknowledge my mother for everything I am and everything I am to be was because of her sacrifices. And there are a lot of Black women who perform miracles like that every day. And then there are Black men who, along the way, took me under their wing when they had absolutely nothing to gain from it. I think about all the lawyers in our community, like the Willie Garys of the world, the Harvard professor, and I'm having a senior moment.
Charles Ogletree?
Charles Ogletree.
Yes.
He took us under the wings and tried to mentor us when he had nothing to gain from it, but said, I understand that we all have to pass the baton because I can get this far. It's going to be the next generation that takes it further. And so education and this mentality that we are the answers of the dreams and prayers of our ancestors is the key. The fact that with education, I read Black Enterprise magazine, and even though Thurgood Marshall and Johnny Cochran, Charles Ogletree were some of my civil rights icons and lawyers that I knew, I got to see Reginald Lewis and understand that it's even more out there to endeavor to strive for. Ken Frazier, Merck was a lawyer, became CEO of a Fortune 500 billion dollar pharmaceutical company. And so what I say to young people all the time is you are the best that we have to offer the future. Do not sell yourself short. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. You are the best we have to offer the world. And we've been waiting for you to join us on the front line.
Man, I appreciate your encouraging words. We still got a lot of work to do. As I shared with you in the past, in corporate America, we have less Black CEOs today than we did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We got to change the face, literally, of the executive branch within corporate America and make sure it's inclusive and make sure that we because diversity is going to enrich these companies.
Yeah.
Doesn't take away from these companies, it enriches these companies. And we can be the stimulus that helps to get people there, but it's the work of what you've been doing and your associates have been doing. We could not be prouder of you. You have earned the moniker, the trial lawyer for justice, for a reason. And as I said, we're all extraordinarily proud of you. And I'm honored, frankly, and humbled to be your friend, and just enjoy speaking with you and working with you. And I leave it at this with the way my father always left it, is that I look at the world as the glass 3/4 full, not 1/4 empty. And yeah, it's not perfect, but it's going to get better. And I just want to continue to encourage our young folks and the young Black men who are watching this that they can become anything they dream about becoming. Look at Ben Crump, look at others, and know that hard work, as my father used to say all the time, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Yeah. So work hard and do the best that you can.
And I would say this, Butch, just to you as a great example for all the young people who are watching this summit. Every time you have a conversation, every day of your life, try to learn something that you did not learn before. I got a couple of nuggets from Butch Graves, as I always do when we talk. 10K. I know now when I'm litigating, that's one of the main things I'm gonna stick to. Give me this 10K report, your top 5 employees, who are they? You know, what do they make? I didn't know that, but just by engaging with somebody who is intelligent, you learn from. Even if they're not intelligent, you learn not what to do. And then I learned from Butch this whole notion, who report to you, Mr. CEO? You know, that's something, because they try to protect the CEOs in litigation, but they say, oh, they're not familiar, they don't have that type of information. Well, they certainly will know who report to them. Do any of them look like me, Mr. CEO, who report directly to you? How many of them? How many Black people are in your circumference that you have to deal with? Because if you're talking about implicit bias, then it speaks volumes if they don't ever have to interact with a Black person as they make decisions on the corporation. So I say that young people always take these opportunities to learn, as I always take the opportunity to learn from Butch Graves.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the time. Continue to excel. Look forward to speaking with you again. And we're going to be honoring Ben Crump. For those of you who don't know, but we're going to be honoring Ben Crump in person at our Black Men Excel Summit in 2022. So Ben, congratulations. Thanks again for your time and effort. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you so much, brother. God bless you.
God bless you too.